U.S. lawmakers are pushing for a bill to increase semiconductor production on American soil. The move is to secure national security and counter threats from China. Beijing schools putting their plan to reopen on hold after new virus cases cropped up. The patients have no ties to Wuhan and have not left the city in the last 2 weeks, raising questions about the source. The pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong took a violent turn when a pro-Beijing supporter pulled out a knife. Our on-site reporter attacked. Twitter announced it has deleted over 170,000 fake accounts in a network backed by the Chinese regime. This is the second purge in less than a year. And congressional Republicans unveiled what they call the toughest sanctions ever proposed against the CCP and other U.S. adversaries. They argue Congress must adapt to a new strategy to push back against the CCP. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A knife attack has been reported in Hong Kong. One person was reportedly injured. At the scene of the crime, the attacker even went after our on-site reporter. During a live stream hosted by our Cantonese news program, a nearby man could be seen arguing with others. Soon after, he became violent. The man took out a knife and pointed it at one of those he was arguing with. Then he turned and attacked our reporter, whose mobile phone used to film the live stream was knocked over. Bystanders stepped in to stop the attack. One of them was wounded in the process. The attacker was reportedly a supporter of Hong Kong's police, which are responsible for helping to suppress the city's pro-democracy movement. Some citizens were visibly angry with him. Our reporter said after the incident, the man who was injured turned to him and said he supports us. Now to Beijing. New virus cases in Beijing have emerged, partially suspending the city's plan to reopen schools. According to local Chinese media, the patient confirmed to have the virus hadn't left Beijing in the last 2 weeks and had no close contact with anyone from outside the city. The source of his infection is currently unknown. Soon after, 2 more confirmed cases appeared in Beijing. First, second, and third grade students in Beijing were originally scheduled to resume going back to school next week, but the plan is now on pause. Due to the nature of China's censorship, we cannot independently verify whether there are more cases in Beijing right now. But internal documents we've obtained show the Chinese authorities have been covering up virus information since the first wave in Beijing. Back in January, it took Beijing 8 days to announce the first case in this city. On January 12th, China's CDC received a sample of an unknown pneumonia virus from Beijing's city-level CDC. According to rules laid out by China's National Health Commission, Beijing should have handed the sample to the upper-level CDC as soon as it confirmed a positive sample of the virus. Instead, they waited 8 days before making the announcement on January 20th. Later that same day, 3 more major cities in China announced their first cases: Shanghai, Beijing, and Guangzhou. Also on the same day, officials admitted there was human-to-human transmission of the virus. China Affairs analyst Li Lingyi says the Communist Party covered up the seriousness of the situation in hopes of presenting an image of stability and control. Only when officials saw that the situation had spiraled out of control did they admit what was really happening. Apple has removed podcast app Pocket Casts from its App Store in China. That's because the country's Cyberspace Administration says it could be used to access content deemed illegal by the Communist Party. At first, Chinese authorities tried to get the app's developers to censor certain content, but after they refused, the officials demanded that the app be removed from the App Store. 3 Republican senators are introducing what's known as the Beat China bill, aimed at boosting U.S. manufacturing. It's also to help limit dependence on China, especially when it comes to prescription drugs and medical supplies. Senator Kelly Loeffler says the bill acts to incentivize pharmaceutical and medical device and supply manufacturers to relocate to the U.S. She says the U.S. is too reliant on China with regard to our medical supply chain, something that's been amplified amid the pandemic. Senator Joni Ernst explained that the virus should serve as a warning to the U.S. about being overly dependent on China for medical supplies. And Senator Ted Cruz calls the bill especially important for ensuring the safety of Americans. He also notes that mouthpieces of the Chinese Communist Party have threatened to cut off U.S. access to life-saving pharmaceutical products. He says with such a credible threat, it's crucial to bring manufacturing home. The bill would allow qualifying companies to relocate the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies to the U.S. and incentivize them with tax cuts. U.S. senators are introducing new bills that would penalize the Chinese regime for stealing U.S. tech. The bipartisan bill would require the president to update Congress every 6 months on foreign firms or individuals who steal U.S. trade secrets, especially those that threaten U.S. national security or economic health. Under the bill, punishments for the theft would include having their assets frozen or sanctions imposed. According to the Senate Armed Services Committee, the group has advanced its $740 billion national defense policy bill. In a closed-door session, the panel voted overwhelmingly to support it. The bill would cover everything from troop salaries and equipment purchases to powering competition with China. It'll also reflect the nationwide protests and pandemic. In addition, it includes measures to strengthen the U.S. supply chain after the virus crisis exposed companies' dependencies on China. Plus, it imposes limits on integrating U.S. missile defense systems with those that belong to China. The bill will now head to the Senate floor before it can pass Congress and be sent to the president's desk. A group of bipartisan lawmakers asked video conferencing software firm Zoom's CEO to clarify the company's ties to the Chinese regime. This comes after Zoom admitted to suspending user accounts to meet demands from Beijing. Congressman Greg Walden and Kathy McMorris Rogers wrote to the CEO, stating Zoom's recent actions and acquiescence to China raise serious concerns about your data practices, including how you protect information you collect on Americans and, importantly, who you grant access to such information. Going a step further, Senator Josh Hawley gave the CEO an ultimatum. He told the company, it is time for you to pick a side: American principles and free speech or short-term global profits and censorship. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says he's working on a response to China's controversial new law on Hong Kong. The Treasury is reportedly considering measures that could restrict capital flow through Hong Kong. The Chinese Communist Party often uses Hong Kong as a loophole to work around trade embargoes, so less capital flow would also impact mainland China. The U.S. Defense Department says the U.S. is stepping up its production of N95 masks and plans to exceed 1 billion by 2021. It's an effort to decrease American dependence on foreign supply chains, like the ones in China. N95 masks are most commonly used by medical staff. A major in China's army has been arrested at Los Angeles International Airport. He confessed to stealing medical research secrets from the University of California and sending them to the military lab in China. He used a fake passport to enter the U.S. last year as a medical researcher. He may now face up to 10 years in prison. The U.S. reports the sales of over 700,000 tons of soybeans to China. That's because Brazil, China's top soya supplier, has tightened its supplies, driving prices up. The sales come amid Sino-U.S. tensions over the CCP virus and Beijing's so-called Hong Kong national security law. The U.S.-China Phase 1 trade deal stipulates that China increases purchases of U.S. farm goods, but current sales remain well below pre-trade war levels. Twitter is dismantling a network of more than 170,000 fake accounts backed by the Chinese Communist regime. Twitter says the state-backed campaign was manipulating the platform and had violated its policies.
Twitter announced Thursday it removed thousands of accounts backed by the Chinese Communist regime. Almost 2,400 active accounts were suspended for artificially pushing narratives on topics such as the CCP virus. An additional 150,000 state-backed accounts were deleted for their role in amplifying these posts. Twitter researchers determined that these were fake accounts that had links to another state-backed operation that Twitter took down last year. The propaganda campaign also targeted Taiwan and the pro-democracy protest movement in Hong Kong. Twitter said this network was in addition to another Beijing-operated network on Twitter, identified by the U.S. State Department last month. Back in March, a pair of GOP lawmakers urged Twitter to ban scores of accounts for spreading propaganda by the regime. Such propaganda included the claim that the U.S. military was responsible for bringing the virus to China. This accusation was also made by a senior Chinese official. Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska and Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin wrote the letter to Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, questioning whether Chinese officials should use the platform when people from China are prohibited from doing so.
Congressional Republicans unveiled what they call the toughest sanctions ever proposed against the Chinese Communist Party and other U.S. adversaries. The Republican Study Committee, RSC, composed of nearly 150 lawmakers, published a 115-page report on Wednesday. It argued that the old way of thinking about China has failed and that Congress must adapt to a new strategy to push back against the CCP. Some in the raft of policy proposals are bills already introduced in Congress. Highlights include potential sanctions against some of the highest-ranking communist officials over human rights abuses. Even China's Vice Premier Han Zhen is on the sanctions list. Han is one of the 7 members of China's Politburo Standing Committee, even called the 7 men who run China. Han is in charge of Hong Kong affairs and is behind Beijing's hardline crackdown on the semi-autonomous city. Sanctions against officials often involve freezing their assets in the U.S. and suspending their visas and those of their family members. 2 other senior CCP officials of Hong Kong affairs who might face sanctions are Luo Huining and Xia Baolong. Xia previously oversaw a hardline crackdown against churches in eastern China. Other targets include the party secretary for Tibet, who oversees the brutal repression of Buddhists in the province, and Xinjiang Party Secretary, the official behind the massive detention of Uyghur Muslims. The sanctions will also target Chinese officials involved in the so-called United Front Work Department. The CCP uses the tactic of infiltrating foreign politics and establishing Chinese associations and business groups in foreign countries which can act at its orders. They also plant or transform political and community leaders to act in Beijing's favor. The report also pushed for targeted sanctions against Chinese companies for stealing U.S. technology. The report argued that using tariffs to counter Chinese IP theft will hurt U.S. businesses as well. It instead proposed targeted sanctions against Chinese companies that conduct IP theft by cutting them off from the U.S. banking system and restricting their imports and exports to the U.S. It also proposed making it easier for U.S. companies to sue overseas companies who steal trade secrets. Previously, Chinese companies escaped penalties because some relevant U.S. laws don't apply to overseas companies. The report encouraged Congress to amend that. In addition, the proposal advised to stop allowing China state-owned companies to hide behind sovereign immunity so that these companies can be held accountable in the U.S. The committee says Congress should also pass laws requiring Chinese companies to disclose if they have a Communist Party committee within the company and how much financial support they received from the Chinese regime. It argues that such information is critical for U.S. investors as well as U.S. national security interests. The report also says until China ends IP theft from American universities and research institutions, Congress should end visas for senior-level Chinese officials and members of the Chinese military, as well as their immediate family members. The last China part of the report pushed for strengthening U.S. relationships with allies in the Indo-Pacific region to counter China's influence. It said the U.S. should expand trade relations or seek free trade agreements with Asian countries, including Taiwan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, India, and Mongolia. It argues that some Asian democracies often face political pressure from Beijing, but hesitate to push back because of their economic reliance on China. The report says that stronger relations between the U.S. and its allies in the region not only counter China, but also strengthen the liberal world order. U.S. lawmakers are pushing to boost domestic production of semiconductors. They say the U.S. is overly reliant on foreign companies to produce the technology, and that securing its supply chain is critical for national security. NTD's Juliet Song reports.
U.S. lawmakers have introduced a bipartisan bill to boost advanced chip making on U.S. soil. It seeks to help the U.S. maintain its lead in the industry and counter the threat from China. Semiconductors, or chips, are at the heart of the technology race and vital for national security. They're essential to almost all electronic devices, from smartphones to computers. The chips are also critical for defense and military applications like radar and missiles. Countries dominating the industry can have a significant political advantage over other nations. U.S. firms are the global leaders in chip design and development, accounting for almost half of the global market share, but most of the chips are made outside the United States. China's chip-making ability lags behind world-class companies, but parts of the semiconductor supply chain are based in China. 3 companies that produce the world's fastest and most advanced chips all have factories in China, and there's risk that comes with it. During the virus pandemic, when U.S. hospitals were desperate for personal protective gear, some U.S. companies couldn't get their products out of their own factories in China due to export restrictions. Some in Washington are also worried that TSMC, one of the major chip suppliers, is susceptible to Chinese influence. With the bill, lawmakers are planning to pour tens of billions of dollars into chip development and production in the United States. Countries like South Korea and Germany are trying to lure foreign chip makers with generous incentives. China also unveiled a $1 trillion campaign to compete with the U.S. in critical tech industries. Reporting by Juliet Song, NTD News.
Insurance companies say they won't pay policyholders business losses from CCP virus shutdowns. Insurers argue the monthly payout could cause hundreds of billions of dollars, which could bankrupt them.
Insurance companies don't want to pay small businesses for the revenue losses during the CCP virus shutdowns. This includes policyholders with business interruption coverage. But one New Jersey lawmaker wants to force insurers to pay out even if pandemic coverage isn't explicitly included in the policy. Insurers argue that it would be unconstitutional for a government to force them. They're also worried about the cost. An insurance trade group warns it could cost the industry hundreds of billions of dollars every month to compensate small businesses, and that could bankrupt insurers. But according to Reuters, its estimates are based on an absolute worst-case scenario for the industry. The Insurance Information Institute says that less than half of all small businesses have business interruption coverage, and very few of those policies explicitly cover pandemics. In this case, it would only cost the industry millions per month, not hundreds of billions. But it appears insurers don't even want to pay out to these people. They say business interruption insurance should only cover closures due to physical damage, not pandemics. Trade groups say the industry's stance has deterred people from filing claims, but some are taking legal action with dozens of court cases lined up.
Here's some good news for shoppers. Fifth Avenue stores are open again.
New York City Fifth Avenue shops started reopening Thursday with curbside service. Customers are glad to be back, even though they can't roam around the store on their own yet.
It's about time, and it's better than nothing.
How's the experience?
It was quite nice. Quite nice. I have a personal shopper, and she met me out here and showed me something that I might be interested in, and it will be sent to me.
Employees and customers have to wear face coverings, and stores are limited to 50% capacity. Customers say it's going well.
I came out to return a few items, and I think that the process right now is easy. You know, you just come up to the front, you speak to a representative, they take your information, your receipt, and you'll be on your way back home.
Many are here to return things they ordered online.
We're here for returning some stuff that we ordered online.
How's the experience so far?
I think convenient, not too bad. I was like, there's some weight which is making it a little inconvenient, but otherwise I think they're doing a great job at the returns.
Many businesses were threatened by looting during the riots. Some are still boarded up. The Fifth Avenue Association has a list of stores that are open. In-store retail will start during Phase 2 of reopening.
News from Europe. All shops in England are finally allowed to open, but will customers come back? Over to NTD UK's Neil Woodrow.
Welcome to NTD UK, bringing you UK and European news. I'm Neil Woodrow. The UK government is relaxing lockdown rules to help the most lonely among us. Adults living alone and single parents can meet friends or family in each other's homes starting this weekend. The government calls this a support bubble. But bubbles are exclusive, meaning once you're in one, you can't switch and form another with a different household. In retail, the UK is allowing all non-essential shops to reopen as lockdown measures are further eased.
The government says retailers have taken extraordinary steps to protect employees and customers ahead of reopening on June 15th. UK's finance minister says people should have no worries about returning to retail stores.
It won't be the same as what we were all used to, and it's an environment that means you can shop in confidence, knowing that it's going to be safe, it's going to keep you and your family safe from a health perspective.
For many retailers, encouraging the public back into their stores is going to be crucial for their survival.
Britain's store-based retail sector outside of food has been severely hit by the lockdown, with several weaker players falling into receivership, causing the loss of thousands of jobs. Tech news. Vodafone and Huawei are turning up the heat on London to reconsider removing Huawei from the nation's 5G network. Vodafone warns that the UK's leadership in 5G will be lost if mobile operators are forced to spend time and money replacing existing equipment. London has designated China-owned Huawei a high-risk vendor. Huawei says it's not controlled by Beijing and is an ordinary employee-owned company. But that case just got harder to make after a Wall Street Journal expose of Huawei founder Ren Zhengfei quoted him telling research staff in 2018 to surge forward, killing as you go, to blaze us a trail of blood. And TikTok, a Chinese video-making app owned by Beijing-based ByteDance, is coming under European scrutiny. The European Data Protection Board is setting up a task force to assess TikTok's data collection methods, security, and privacy risks across the European Union. In the US, TikTok is already banned for military personnel and TSA staff due to national security concerns. The company denies it's controlled by the Chinese regime or there is any risk to user data.
Here at China in Focus, we dedicate ourselves to bringing you truthful, unbiased reporting. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the latest updates, and see you tomorrow.